It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Has World War III already started? How many countries all over the world are already spiraling into total collapse due to the bottom line factor of ecological collapse? What role are weather weapons playing in all that's unfolding? What part has covert weather warfare played for decades, leading up to the dire crossroad we have now reached? From WCBN Radio, The Gateway Pundit, and other sources, Florida Republican lawmaker introduces legislation to ban weather engineering amid rising concerns over climate manipulation. From that report, a Florida Republican senator has introduced SB 56, a bill that aims to prohibit weather modification activities within the state. Introduced by Senator Leah Garcia, the legislation targets chemical and technological methods used to manipulate weather patterns, temperature, or sunlight intensity, effectively halting a controversial practice often linked to geoengineering. The report continues. It specifically prohibits the injection, release, or dispersion by any means of a chemical or chemical compound, a substance, or an apparatus into the atmosphere within the borders of this state, aka Florida, for the express purpose of affecting the temperature, the weather, or the intensity of sunlight, end quote. Yes, the climate engineering insanity will be exposed sooner than later, one way or another. This kind of legislation, like that which was recently passed in Tennessee, though impossible to enforce, is still extremely helpful overall in the battle to expose and halt climate engineering. A critical mass of awareness on this issue is the bottom line. If we can accomplish that, so many wheels in this battle will then begin to turn on their own. The fur will fly. The proverbial pitchforks and torches moment when so many that are even passively participating, even participating in the cover-up, and that is a great many indeed, including matrix corporate media, when they realize they are in fact participating in their own near-term demise. That moment is coming. You can't put this issue in the rearview mirror. It's getting bigger and worse in front of the windshield with each passing day. What continues to do great harm to the cause of exposing and halting climate engineering? The sources and sites that continue to refuse to admit climate engineering is now ongoing, not something that could, may, might happen someday. Sources and sites that continue to pretend climate engineering is just a proposal. Sources and sites that pretend they are fighting climate engineering while actually denying it, while actually pretending that the jet-sprayed dispersions in our skies are just jet exhaust. So, again, I ask, how do such narratives help in the desperate battle to expose and halt ongoing climate engineering operations? They don't help. They harm. The narrative that climate engineering is just a proposal is exactly the narrative the controllers want parroted. The narrative that we are only seeing jet exhaust, again, exactly the narrative the controllers want to propagate. From the New York Times, the U.S. is building an early warning system to detect geoengineering. This has to be heard, to be believed. Are the powers that shouldn't be laughing it up while drinking martinis behind closed doors? An early warning system to detect geoengineering? Really? How about looking up and taking note of the filth-filled, jet-sprayed skies that any but the clinically blind can see with shocking clarity, and the criminal cabal masquerading as our government expects us to pretend to believe that they need some high-tech early warning system to determine if anything might be going on? Yes, we truly live in an asylum. Any and every so-called scientist that goes along with this kind of idiocy should be held legally and morally accountable for the part they are playing in the criminal climate engineering cover-up. Once this issue is brought fully into the light of day, which it will be sooner than later. The New York Times report continues. In a guarded compound at the foot of the Rockies, government scientists are working on a new kind of global alarm system, one that can detect if another country, or maybe just an adventurous billionaire, tries to dim the sun, a system that would alert American scientists to geoengineering. They continue. Many worry that solar geoengineering could have unintended consequences. Yeah, what could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong with dumping tens of millions of tons annually of toxic nanoparticles, ozone-destroying nanoparticles, hydrological cycle disrupting nanoparticles that completely contaminate everything on the surface? I'll get to updates on that shortly. What could go wrong? And many worry that it could have unintended consequences. The Times report then says, shattering regional weather patterns and damaging everything from agriculture to local economies. You mean like right now, all over the globe, that kind of damage to agriculture and local economies? The Times then says, so the United States is building a system that would allow it to determine if and when others may be trying to tamper with Earth's thermostat. I don't have the words for this kind of moronicism from the Times that represents the matrix, of course, and spewing out this kind of infantile idiocy. They then say the early warning system for geoengineering is an effort splintered across federal agencies and laboratories. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has the device to measure aerosol concentrations and raise a red flag at any anomalies. Really? They're going to raise a red flag? How many times have I covered on this broadcast that NOAA reported, I believe between 2005 and 2015, that the atmospheric aerosol content doubled in that decade, and they had no idea where it was coming from? So when do they sound the alarm? When the planet's nothing but a spinning, lifeless ball of rock? The Times then says, as of now, they, assuming the government scientists they're speaking about, believe that solar geoengineering has only been attempted at a very small scale, despite, the Times says, the claims of conspiracy theorists. Try to get your arms around the planetary Truman Show that we live in, that the obvious climate engineering operations going on in our skies, completely altering them from any historical norm, disrupting everything, and we are to still go along with this knee-jerk programmed conspiracy theory mantra? The report then says some 400 miles south of Boulder, Scandia National Laboratories researchers at one of the country's preeminent nuclear weapons laboratories have worked out another part of the puzzle, how to identify the location of an aerosol release. This is further into the land of moronic stupidity. You can't look up and see a plane spraying. They have to have some sort of special technology to detect when a jet aircraft is spewing geoengineering particulate into the sky. The Times then says this: the United States is still years away from being ready to detect a solar geoengineering effort, but is on the leading edge. Wow, no words for this. This is far worse than, yeah, we were driving an EV dune buggy on the moon well over 50 years ago, and we can't go back because we lost the technology. And we don't have any films of it because film reels were expensive and no one was using them, so we just taped over them. Those are official statements from NASA. What will it take to wake the American public up to the fact that we are absolutely drowning in a tidal wave of absurd deception and lies on every possible front? Let's add this, a moronic headline from the UK Telegraph. Warning system will detect supervillain-style plots to manipulate the weather. They say Washington fears hostile foreign states or mega-rich entrepreneurs could be hatching plans to conduct solar geoengineering. So let's consider this. So we have the whole global climate science community and every government around the globe saying we need to put jets in the sky to spray particles to block the sun. We're losing massive amounts of sunlight. That's what brought me into this battle 20 plus years ago. Building a large off-grid home, about a 15K solar system, 15,000 watts, and losing massive amounts of my solar uptake from whatever these jets were emitting. I mean, 60, 70, 80% of my uptake. That's not a loss of visible light. That's loss of direct sunlight, which blocks solar. I knew it couldn't just be quote, condensation. So I began to test my precipitation, and I did not want to find what I found, starting with aluminum in my rain that skyrocketed over 18 months of testing from 7 parts per billion to 3,450 parts per billion, literally toxic rain, aluminum being a primary element in climate engineering patents, toxic to all life forms, no exceptions. What was I to do but to completely alter my entire life? It's been altered ever since. I've been engaged in this battle 24/7 ever since. And mainstream media calls this a supervillain style plot to manipulate the weather. We have publicized weather modification programs everywhere, but we are supposed to not believe that our government would ever do this without asking for our consent, just like they did with the nuclear detonations, right? I'll get to that later in this broadcast too. How many Americans ignore that? How many Americans look the other way and pretend that somehow there's some benevolent force behind our government? It couldn't be further from the truth. New from MSN, the surprising origins of those white lines airplanes leave behind. Again, more pathetic, transparent attempts to deny what is so shockingly obvious in our skies. Story by Amanda Morgan. Maybe Amanda needs a link to the dimming, CC'd to about 50 or 100 other people with it so that she knows many are listening to the conversation and many will want to hear why she is taking this position when there is so much data to prove that this is a reality, not a conspiracy theory. The report from MSM and Amanda Morgan states, you may have heard the conspiracy theories on social media refer to these lines in the sky as chemtrails, but they're actually called contrails, she says, because she says so. If you've caught yourself wondering what exactly causes them and whether there is any validity to the chemtrail conspiracy theories, you're certainly not alone. She continues, the conspiracy theories around contrails have been around for a while, but recently they've been gaining popularity thanks to certain influencers fond of spreading misinformation online. What is misinformation? Anything that disputes the official denial. According to the theories, quote, chemtrails are the result of someone, parentheses, she says, in most cases, the blame is placed on the government. Who else will we blame? Space aliens? This is, again, MSN report. Other sources have picked this up as well. Spraying harmful chemicals from airplanes for all sorts of nefarious purposes. Now, our government would never do that, would they? Never. As we know from the Washington Post, I've cited this many times as far back as 1977, no less than 239 open-air biological tests conducted on innocent, unknowing U.S. civilians without their knowledge or consent. And that's that many years ago. How many have been conducted since? And we're supposed to believe that our government would never conduct any kind of nefarious experiment. The MSN report then says, some believe that they are part of an elaborate plan to control the weather, while others claim they are to control or reduce the population. It certainly results when you have toxic elements, starting with aluminum, settling down through the air column, being absorbed and inhaled by everything. It's going to have that result, isn't it? MSN then says, in an age where anyone can gain traction and spreading their opinions online, it's more important than ever to rely on hard science and trust the expert. Yes, the government bought and paid for kind of experts. That's who we're trained, programmed from birth to trust. According to aviation experts and meteorologists, contrails are simply condensation. They're basically clouds that form when hot air and exhaust from jet engines combust. We know all the narrative here, right? We know this. Never mind the film footage of these aircrafts at altitude, C-17s, KC-135s, other military tankers, even commercially marked aircraft, nozzles visible, retrofit nozzles visible, turning dispersions on and off. It's not condensation, period. Condensation doesn't do that. Do you see researchers in Antarctica when their breath is condensing and they're talking for 10 or 15 minutes in some documentary? Do they have a cloud forming above their head that just stays there? Really? Is that what condensation does? If you're warming your car up on a cold day, do you have a massive cloud start to form over your neighborhood? Really? Total insanity, all of it. Let's add this. From the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, they're being brought into the cover-up now as well. Quote, can they control the weather? Question mark. How the secretive history of weather weapons fuels conspiracy theories by Justin Key can fill. All these authors should get a link to the dimming, shouldn't they? And many other people CC'd in the communication and asked why they're not addressing this. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists report begins with this: in the wake of the devastation caused by Hurricanes Helene and Milton, online conspiracy theories about weather control have flourished. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell described the storm of disinformation as, quote, absolutely the worst I've ever seen. We've heard that before. The news cycle quickly picked up the story, prompting President Biden to issue a statement. I've been over that in this broadcast. He called it stupid and beyond ridiculous. What's stupid and beyond ridiculous is those that expect us to believe these statements apply to what we can see with our eyes, what we have mountains, decades of documents to back up, lab testing from all over the world to back up, historical data to back up of military operations doing exactly all of this. The report then says, although it may sound like science fiction, the U.S. government once engaged in serious research into weather weapons. Really, I had no idea. And other hostile environmental modification technologies. The U.S. eventually halted its pursuit, sure they did, of weather weapons. Not because using weather modification as a weapon was impossible, as is often assumed. We never assume that. But because of the possibility that such a terrifying technology was a Pandora's box that might fall into the wrong hands. Really, that stopped them? Did that stop them from developing nuclear nightmare bombs? Didn't stop them. It propelled them forward, full speed, pedal to the metal. The report then says the government interest in weather control is longstanding, dating from at least 1891. 1891. It reached its zenith in the early 70s, long before that, before being banned by the Environmental Modification Treaty, which doesn't mean anything. We know that. Nobody pays attention to international treaties, which forbade widespread, long-lasting, or severe weather weapons for hostile purposes, key term there, not over your own population. Nothing said about that. That's fine if governments do that. Keep that in mind. Many weather weapon program details remain shrouded in secrecy. Really, imagine that, like the Kennedy files that were never, ever released. But we now know more about how serious top U.S. officials regarded weather manipulation, and that the superpowers were indeed engaged in serious research into strategic weather weapons and terrified that the other side could get there first. That's always their excuse, isn't it? They then say a number of weaponized environmental modification concepts were explored over the years: artificial lightning, volcanoes, earthquakes that could, quote, level enemy cities, and atmospheric modification that could cause cancer or starve agricultural products, among other things. Report then says, but most applied research has been directed at rainmaking and hurricane control. Weren't we told when we showed the frequency transmissions that manipulated Hurricane Helene? Please look at that at geoengineeringwatch.org. Decide for yourself. 90-second video recording the interaction between frequency transmissions that are known to have a repelling effect on the air mass that's been heavily seeded with electrically conductive particles. Look for yourself. Look at that interaction and try to convince yourself that this isn't going on. And we're told by people like Joe Biden that this is, what did he say, stupid and ridiculous. Post-war interest was picked, the report says, when the U.S. Strategic Air Command proclaimed in 1954 that the nation had controlled the weather and would control the world. Johnson said it later in 1962. Let's remember that. This has been ongoing for so very long, and we still have the so-called climate science community pretending that all of this is just some proposal, and many online sources and sites pretending with them, while at the same time pretending they're fighting climate engineering by pretending it isn't happening. How does that work exactly? A Presidential Science Advisory Committee report described weather control as the next white-hot fight of the Cold War. Continuing with the report, and keep in mind, all of this from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists participating in the climate engineering cover-up themselves. They say we now know of numerous weather modification experiments that took place between 1946 and 1983 when Hurricane King approached the Florida coast in October 1947. The United States initiated Project Cirrus, been over that in this broadcast many times, for which the U.S. aircraft dumped 130 pounds of crushed ice into the storm in an attempt to moderate wind speed. Soon afterward, the hurricane intensified and veered inland, hitting the city of Savannah. While it is now understood that the effect was due to natural steering, because they say so. Okay, not because they've proven anything, but just because they say so. The Cirrus Project lead Nobel laureate Irving Longmire stoked conspiracy theories by publicly claiming credit. Hurricane victims threatened to sue in response, forcing the United States to continue hurricane control research in Project Storm Fury, 1962 to 1983, and everywhere in between, in secrecy. Really? Our government doing something in secret? During the Vietnam War, the United States later sought to apply what it had learned by launching Operation Popeye between 67 and 72. The Air Force conducted cloud seeding experiments, been over that many times in this broadcast, over targets in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, because they could. That's why. That's why they do anything, because they can, not because they should. To extend the monsoon season, disrupting troop and supply movement, so they could do it then. Let's keep this in perspective. They were very, very successful then, so successful that, again, by the mid-70s, 76, I believe, the INMOD treaties were passed that were international treaties to forbid weather modification. But now they tell us, no, they don't have this kind of technology. Just like the technology to go to the moon that was also lost, right? According to a memo to the president from the then National Security Advisor, Walt Rostow, one of these experiments caused a landslide in Vietnam's Chao Valley, killing scores of individuals. Popeye came under intense scrutiny between 71 and 74. Washington Times, New York Post published exposés in an effort to shield the program. The U.S. officials downplayed, stonewalled, and repeatedly contradicted themselves in congressional testimony. Really? I can't imagine that kind of behavior from our government, our criminal cabal masquerading as a government. Heightening suspicion. U.S. Secretary of Defense at the time had also assured Congress that no cloud seeding was underway in Vietnam. Blatant lie. The report admits so. Caught in a lie, this is right from the report, he was forced to apologize, lending further credence to conspiracy theories. By the time more details came to light in May of 1974, there was a popular momentum for a ban on weather weapons. Just like there is now. As I covered at the start of this broadcast, Florida, the latest state on the growing list of states that are finally, thankfully, trying to do exactly the same. Ban weather warfare. If we have any chance of fully exposing and halting the climate engineering weather warfare global assault, the effort will take all of us. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate engineering operations, aka weather warfare. Reaching a critical mass of awareness, the only way forward in this fight. We can and we absolutely must reach this critical mass of awareness, starting a conversation on climate engineering that leads people to a credible source of data. Credibility is key. Is extraordinarily helpful. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. A conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Our very high-quality printed materials, full color, we pass on for less than our cost of producing and shipping. Our goal, my personal goal, my life's mission, to see this insanity in our skies exposed and halted, and the planet allowed to respond on its own to the damage already done. Please help us to sound the alarm. New from the UK Guardian. PFAS, those are forever chemicals, been over that many times, and microplastics become more toxic when combined. Research shows it's called synergistic toxicity. I've been over that so many times, and it's not just with these two elements. Let's add metals. We know that when combined, the toxicity between aluminum and mercury can increase as much as 10,000%. That's 100 times worse. What happens when we add all the rest of this concoction? It's a wonder any of us are able to function at this point. How much longer will we be able to? The Guardian report then says, study detects synergistic effects making substances more dangerous, raising alarm since humans are exposed to both. Yes, they are. It's in every breath we take, including heavy metals. The Guardian report continues, few human-made substances are as individually ubiquitous and dangerous as PFAS chemicals and microplastics. Let's not forget aluminum. Everywhere, all over the globe, every drop of rain, all of these elements. And when they join forces, the report states there is a synergistic effect that makes them even more toxic and pernicious. The findings underscore the critical need to understand the impacts of chemical mixtures on wildlife and human health. The report then says PFAS are a class of about 15,000 compounds and growing by the day. They're called forever chemicals because they do not naturally break down and accumulate in our systems. They're linked to cancer, kidney disease, liver problems, immune disorders, birth defects, and other serious health problems. In other words, everything bad. These are part of the problem. That's just what we know about. Question, isn't it mind-numbingly perplexing that even though it's inarguably clear that the true controllers realize the planet can no longer support the current paradigm or anywhere near the over 8 billion humans that currently exist, how many even now still believe that the above-the-law powers that shouldn't be are actually trying to protect and preserve their health and the health of their posterity? Really? Question, if the insects can no longer survive, and we're down about 80 to 90% terrestrial and aquatic insect life right now, today, how long can the human race hang on? That blank isn't hard to fill in. New from phys.org. Canada AI project hopes to help reverse mass insect extinction. Geoengineeringwatch.org first published the fact that the insect populations were crashing based on our research with former government scientists in 2012. The so-called climate science community tried to marginalize us in every way they could, and now they're admitting to it because they've suddenly decided they want to tell the truth. No, because they can't hide it any longer. This report says researchers in Canada are using artificial intelligence to monitor the ongoing mass extinction of insects, hoping to collect data that can help reverse species to collapse and avert catastrophe for the planet. Is anyone looking up in this group? Are they connecting the dots? Aluminum toxic to all life. It's raining down through the air column. It's being spewed into our skies. What's wrong with the human race? What's wrong with so many in the human race? They refuse to see the truth, let alone tell it. The report says, of all the mass extinctions we have experienced in the past, the one affecting insects is happening at 1,000 times the rate. That's from the director of the Montreal Insectarium. Let's put this into perspective. It's happening 1,000 times faster than previous mass extinctions, which should alarm the hell out of you. But it's happening over 15,000 times faster than the normal background rate, which should alarm you even more. The report then says the decline is occurring so quickly it can't be properly monitored, making it impossible to put in place the necessary actions to slow it down. The single biggest leap we can make in that direction is to stop the spewing of highly toxic nanoparticles into skies all over the world. Scientists have warned the world is facing its biggest mass extinction event since the dinosaur age. That's the last sentence from this phys.org report. This is way worse, way faster than anything in Earth's geologic past. And how many are completely asleep at the wheel watching scripted political theater day in and day out in between Caribbean cruises and trips to Disney World? From MSN, Arctic blast to hit 6 states on Thanksgiving with -20 wind chill. Yes, they want you to think it's so cold, cold, cold with chemical ice nucleation. And that's exactly what it is. Please search the Engineering Winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. You'll find mainstream media has covered other governments doing this. They won't cover our own doing it, but they covered China. Please search Chinese scientists create artificial snowstorm. Everybody covered it. Guardian, Popular Science, MSNBC, CNN, everybody. But you bring it up here, and you're a conspiracy theorist, tinfoil hat wearing nutcase, right? How many of the public goes along with that? Because again, they want their personal party to continue. They don't want to be disturbed, and they certainly don't want any resistance from family or friends. This report says temperatures will plunge across the northern plains beginning on Thanksgiving. They always like this around the holidays because people really remember it. And then they forget about the hottest summer since record keeping began, which we just had. We've had let me put this into perspective as well. I think we're up to, I want to say 700 months in a row of above normal temperatures. Last 10 years, completely off the charts. Based on all paleo data, likely the fastest warm-up in the last 120,000 years. But you see a headline like this and everybody goes blank. Look how cold, cold, cold it is. Sure, it's a chemical cold. It feels like a chemical cold. You can tell when they're chemically nucleating. I can where I live because all I hear is jet aircraft above my skies, and I live in the middle of nowhere, not under any commercial flight paths. Sounds like I'm on the end of an LAX runway. and this really unnatural cold layer descends to the surface. You can smell a faint chemical smell at times, extremely cold to the touch. This is not nature, and it's wreaking havoc on everything that's still trying to fight to survive on our planet. And we're going to join them. We're going to join the ranks of the insects soon. If they can't survive, we won't be far behind. They say the frigid temperatures will also remain through the weekend, giving holiday travelers something to contend with. That will make them remember the chemical cool down. The journey home will be cold. Nearly 80 million Americans are expected to travel for Thanksgiving. The National Weather Service Prediction Center stated and warned that temperatures could plunge as much as 40 degrees below zero when factoring in the wind chill. So people don't remember that it's just wind chill. They only remember 40 below zero. How cold could that be? And we see charts on Weather Nation and Weather Channel, and they'll show the departure from the day before temperature. So they'll show negative 40, negative 30. That doesn't mean it's negative 40 or negative 30. It means that the temperatures dropped 40 degrees in a day, which is also wrong, but it's a long way from being negative 40. Maybe it's 40 above still, and it was 80 the day before, so they show negative 40. How deceptive is that? They do everything they can to confuse and divide the population. It's working all too well, unfortunately. But they say next week, temperatures in the northern plains will trend above average. That's what happens after the chemical cool down passes. Weather whiplash right back to warm up. It's getting worse. It's going to get far worse. From the New York Post, coast-to-coast winter storm packing heavy snow to cause chaos for Thanksgiving holiday travel. This is just more of the same. And if we continue on, I'll get to this in a moment, the lake effect snow. This report says from New York Post, snow will become widespread as the system sweeps into the Northeast Thanksgiving Day. They try to hit the holidays as much as they can. From Fox News, Thanksgiving winter storm puts millions on alert for Northeast for heavy snow, rain threatening holiday travel. Most rain is expected in the Midwest, but temperatures may fall enough to produce snow in a narrow band stretching from central Illinois to central Ohio. Is this like the narrow band that we had a satellite image of? A band of snow that was 10 miles wide and 300 miles long across flat ground in Kansas. Is that nature? Really? How about a geoengineering jet spewing chemical ice nucleating elements, leaving a 10-mile wide, 300-mile long stripe across Kansas? Nothing to see here. Move along. From thewatchers.org, long-duration lake effect snow event to impact Lake Erie region. This is becoming more absurd as well, because for those that don't know, the Great Lakes are far into record warm territory. In fact, here's a headline on that front from mlive.com. Lake Erie incredibly warm for this time of year, shattering record. How warm? They're pushing 60 degrees, some of the Great Lakes. And so when they blow an atmospheric pressure zone manipulated wind across the lakes, then pick up some moisture and chemically nucleate it, they can dump some lake effect snow where they want and create some sensationalized headlines of all the snow, snow, snow. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous while the Great Lakes continue to superheat, and yet they sensationalize these events in specific regions for their photo ops. From Fox News, Oklahoma sees record-breaking number of tornadoes. When you create a cold, dense layer on the surface with strong surface winds, which are part of what helps augment the endothermic reacting characteristics of chemical ice nucleating elements, and you collide that with a warm air mass, with moisture being pumped up from the record warm Gulf of Mexico, what happens? Colliding warm and cold air masses. Oh, tornadoes. Yeah, that's right. That's what happens. Again, Fox Weather, Oklahoma sees record-breaking number of tornadoes in November. Final summary on California's latest heavily sensationalized rain event. Where I live, in the wilderness on the east side of Lake Shasta, we received about 20 inches of rain over the course of this whole ordeal, which is not historically unusual for us here. We get over 70 inches of rain a year here, and there was nothing heavy in the way of deluges here because frequency transmissions, which we can see blatantly on precipitation radar loops, are scattering that moisture into the widest possible area. That's why you have many regions with this featureless, rainless skies day after day. It's scattering that moisture. So we had a very measured precipitation here over the course of many days. And after almost 7 months of nothing, no rain, I was finally able to start my hydro, and after 20 inches of rain, my hydropower, by the way, I have wind, hydro, and solar at my off-grid home, and the stream is already dry again because the ground is so dry that moisture just disappeared here. It's phenomenal. I've never seen this before. 2 days, the stream that runs my hydro is now dry. How long can this continue? We have aquifers going dry all over the globe. Overall global precipitation is dropping, not raising. That defies the laws of physics, which make clear the atmosphere carries 7% more moisture for every degree C of warming. It must rain more on a warming planet. Our planet's in total meltdown, far above what we're officially being told, but yet it's raining less. And that can't happen unless there's a factor we're not being told about. That factor is climate engineering, thwarting evaporation. Lastly, this shocking contrast, new from the UK Guardian. Southwest France swelters in staggering 26.9 degrees C November night heat. Temperatures this week would be exceptionally warm for summer, the report says. Never mind late November. Towns in southwest France roasted in completely extreme heat in the early hours of Tuesday, with overnight temperatures hitting, again, 26.9 C. That's over 80 degrees. Over 80 degrees late November in France. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Climate scientists across the country describe the nighttime heat as, quote, staggering and phenomenal for reaching such highs in so late in the year. We don't see that headline anywhere in the U.S., do we? No. We see Thanksgiving winter storm, millions on alert, heavy snow, coast-to-coast snowstorms. That's all we see. We don't see the meltdowns happening in other parts of the world. We just see the chemical ice-nucleated winter weather theater events. Here's a question. Why is geoengineeringwatch.org the only source that is desperately trying to bring to light this core component of climate engineering? Chemical ice nucleation for weather modification, translation, engineering winter. Why are we the only source that does so? And so many other sources that pretend to be fighting climate engineering claim that these completely chemically engineered cool downs are somehow signs of a coming ice age or global cooling. Exactly the narrative the power structure wants. How is it helping to fight climate engineering by denying climate engineering? Moving on, back to the staggering overall global heat, hottest summer on record, hottest year on record. They've already determined that 2024 will be adding to the latest 10 years of all hottest years on record. There's this new science report study from ScienceDaily.com. Think ionosphere heater-induced high-pressure heat domes. Think HARP in Alaska. That's one such facility. Here's the headline. Unexplained heat wave hotspots are popping up across the globe. The report says so extreme they can't be explained by global warming models. A striking new phenomenon is emerging. Distinct regions are seeing repeated heat waves that are so extreme they fall far beyond what any model of global warming can predict or explain, just like the French heat I just went over. A new study provides the first worldwide map of such regions, which show up on every continent except Antarctica. Like giant angry skin blotches, the report says. In recent years, these heat waves have killed tens of thousands of people, withered crops and forests, and sparked devastating wildfires. The anomalous occurrence of temperatures at the far upper end and beyond anything that would be expected with simple upward shifts in mean temperatures. But, the report states, the causes of the extreme heat outbreaks are not entirely clear. Gee, we just don't know. We don't know where all these particles are coming from. We don't know what is causing the disruption in the hydrological cycle. We don't know what's destroying the ozone layer. We don't know what all that filth is in our skies. And this is the so-called climate science community, the so-called experts we're trained, taught, and programmed to believe from birth. Asylum. They then say, due to the unprecedented nature of these heat waves, that they are actually linked to very severe health impacts, and never mind the elements that we're breathing, I've already been over that, and can be disastrous for agriculture, vegetation, and infrastructure. We're not built for them, the report says, and we might not be able to adapt fast enough. Now, there's no adapting to a dead planet. Keep that in mind, and that is the road we're on. From the UK Guardian, 35 million Africans driven from homes by war and climate disasters. New report states threefold increase in internal displacement across the African continent, with flooding and drought posing a growing threat. Drought, deluge scenarios, climate engineering. And about AFRICOM, all the U.S. bases in Africa, the crown jewel weapon of the controllers, a weapon with which they can bring nations to their knees without those populations ever even knowing they're under assault, and then force their governments to allow U.S. occupation. That's how it works. From Yahoo News, historic storm causes major flooding in eastern Brazil. And keep in mind the Amazon that has had unbelievable drought. People could walk across the Amazon River in sand. Never been this bad. 75,000 plus fires this year alone. But on another part of Brazil, deluge. On the subject of deluge, from reliefweb.int, flooding in Malaysia and southern Thailand. Next headline, from the International Institute for Environment and Development. Let's stop there. That's a glaring oxymoron in and of itself, isn't it? You can't perpetually expand and consume on a finite planet with finite resources, but these so-called institutes would have us believe that. Here's the headline, Thailand's floods, complex political and geopolitical factors behind the crisis. What does that mean? They weren't towing the line for those in power? And that's what caused the flooding? Really? From CBS, heavy rains in Bolivia send mud crashing into the capital, destroying homes. It's happening all over the globe, and we see virtually none of this. None on corporate matrix media. From the Weather Channel, Storm Bert brings deadly flooding and wind to the UK. From Barrows.com, coffee hits its highest price since 1977. Dry weather is hitting those supplies. Drought, deluge, blame it on nature. That's how it works. From the Center for International Environmental Law, COP29, been over that in previous broadcasts, rich countries shirk climate duties, but they're not above the law. Sure they are. When they print the money, they make the laws, and that's how it has worked. And this whole climate conference, everything, all 29 of them are a joke, smoke and mirrors, pretending they're going to change business as usual when behind closed doors, they are simply forcing countries to actively or passively participate in the climate engineering insanity so they can keep business as usual until the last possible moment before impact. That's how it works. At COP29, I believe the rich countries, the ones that print the money, offered the poor countries something in the order of $300 billion, as if they would pay that anyway, which they never have, never would, never will, and as if printing money can fix what's wrong with our planet. It can't, and it won't. And you can't eat those shiny metals that everybody's pushing as if that's going to save them from what's coming. It won't. From Earth.com, collapse of Earth's main ocean water circulation system is already happening. I've stated that for a decade and a half. It's now being admitted to. Scientists have been studying this phenomenon, and according to recent research published in Nature Geoscience, it's a bigger deal than we thought. How many points on how many environmental collapse issues do they say this? Issues that I have stated emphatically for, again, a decade and a half on most broadcasts and longer before we started the geoengineeringwatch.org site, that it's far worse than anything we're being told, and now they're starting to admit to it because they can't hide it any longer. With that point in mind, here's our final excerpt from this report. Time is not on our side. The effects of the slowdown are spreading faster than we thought. There you have it. How is it possible that I knew, that geoengineeringwatch.org knew? Because we based our conclusions on available data. How could the so-called academic community, the whole of the so-called climate science community, not know it was this bad? How can they not know that climate intervention operations are raging in skies all over the world, making an already horrific scenario of very poor human stewardship of our planet far worse still? The final nails in our collective coffin if climate engineering is allowed to continue. Keep that in mind. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast. Installment number 486, November 30th, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News brought to you by geoengineeringwatch.org. geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of this commercial-free, non-political broadcast can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column, and on the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. I'm going to skip most of my normal announcement. I hope those who truly want to make a difference in this battle will search our home site, look for our materials that are provided only to help you move this fight forward. Help us to do so. Please share the link to the dimming with authors of environmental articles, the administrators of ag groups, environmental groups, elected officials. The list is endless. Please help us to share the dimming, which is the single most comprehensive educational tool on this subject. We need all the help we can get, and time is not on our side. Keep that in mind. Every day counts in this battle. I have too much to cover. I'm going to skip everything else on my normal announcement. Let's move on. Weather Channel explains sun halo. This is a glaring example of the climate engineering cover-up actors at the Weather Channel that are trying to explain away as natural the atmosphere full of reflective particles that's part of solar radiation management and the constant sun halos they now create. And the climate engineering cover-up actors, again at the Weather Channel, are trying to convince the public this is natural when it's anything but. From the UK Guardian, world will be unable to cope with volume of plastic waste in 10 years, warned experts. It's unable right now. And it's not just decomposing plastics. Polymer fibers are part of the climate engineering mix listed in patents. And as I've stated many times, polymer fibers and graphene, now both in our rain, as lab tests have proven, are used militarily as biological carrier platforms. What's that mean? To carry a biological from the cloud to the ground. What would that be for? Not hard to connect that dot, is it? This report on the ubiquitous contamination of nanoplastics states that plastics are linked to heart attack, stroke, and are showing up in human testes, semen, adding evidence of the ubiquity of plastics and concern over the health risks. The plastics crisis is widely recognized as a threat to human health, biodiversity, and the climate. It's not just plastics, it's heavy metals. And yes, they're in all of us. And yes, we're breathing them in with every single breath we take. Doesn't matter if you believe it or not. It's happening. And let's add pollution on top of that, because I'm not denying all the other forms of pollution. I'm simply saying this massively undisclosed aerosol dispersion in our sky is a crime to cover up. And there's far too many participating in that crime. Let's add more puzzle pieces so we can gain an even clearer image of just how dark the horizon is and just how interconnected it all is. From the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, Nuclear Famine, Climate and Effects of Regional Nuclear War. Report states a nuclear war using as few as 100 weapons anywhere in the world would disrupt the global climate and agricultural production so severely that the lives of more than 2 billion people would be in jeopardy from mass starvation. Let's stop there. No, wrong. Any nuclear exchange at this point with the planet and the climate and the atmosphere, as badly damaged as it is, will be the end for all of us. It will strip away what little is left of the ozone layer, which climate engineering has destroyed, not hairspray cans. Think about that. We're told hairspray cans and the CFCs in them destroyed the ozone layer. Never mind the fleets of thousands of geoengineering aircraft spewing their filth into the skies for decades, microwaving that with frequency transmitters around the globe, all of it known to destroy the ozone layer. Never mind any of that. Let's not mention it. Let's pretend it was hairspray cans several decades ago and it's now all better. When you can feel the sun scorching your skin, any nuclear exchange will be our end. And you have the coward warhawks in Washington waging war. More on that in a moment. More from this article, a landmark report titled Nuclear Famine, summarizes the latest scientific work which shows that a so-called limited or regional nuclear war would be neither limited nor regional. A war that detonates less than 1/20th of the world's nuclear weapons would still crash the climate, the global food supply chains, and likely public order. Not likely, most definitely. Famines and unrest, they say, would kill hundreds of millions, perhaps even billions. The findings come at a time of greatly heightened tensions among nuclear states and amid warnings that we are closer to nuclear war than we have ever been. Again, I want to make this clear. Any nuclear exchange will be the final nail in our collective coffins, period. We'll strip away what's left of the planet's ozone layer, life support systems, done, game over. When all you have left to sustain your grip on power is a hammer, everything in your way looks like a nail. It's called perpetual war until absolutely nothing is left To expect bad men to do nothing wrong is madness, as the proverb goes. Take the time to watch Oppenheimer, the movie Oppenheimer, then watch Trinity, the nuclear bomb movie, and you'll get a taste of just how insane our species as a whole is and just how close we are to our own self-extermination. Let's add this, new from NPR. Nuclear energy may be seeing a renaissance. Yes, because when you know that we're going to hit the wall soon, why not just put the pedal to the metal and reinstitute dilapidated nuclear plants that are ticking time bombs, 442 of them. When society collapses, we're going to have 442 Fukushimas. We don't need a nuclear war. We're going to have the same effect from 442 nuclear meltdowns. Who's going to man those plants that take decades to shut down when nothing will be functioning? None of that bodes well for life on Earth, does it? But the global controllers will be safe in their bunkers, right? Not so much. From the Sentinelintelligence.net source, why bunkers won't save the super rich. From that report, if you ever wonder if you're taking the end of the world too seriously, you can always Google doomsday bunkers and see what the billionaires are up to. Yes, they are digging in and getting ready. How many notice that in almost every post-apocalyptic feature film, and there are many, nature and the environment have somehow survived? The planet's life support systems are magically still working. To those that believe that's how our story will end on the current course, time to rethink your perception of reality. Short of a complete course correction, no one will get out alive. Earth will become a scorched, lifeless ball of rock spinning through the harsh expanse of space. It's called a runaway feedback Venus syndrome scenario. From nuclear everything to already advanced climate and environmental complete collapse, unless or until there's a critical mass of awakening at the deepest levels of consciousness, this will be our extremely near-term destination. Ponder this from the Sanskrit scriptural text. Now I am death, the destroyer of worlds, end quote. The Hopi prophecies stated in the time of great change there would be cobwebs spun in the sky. Does that not look like climate intervention operations? It does to me. How many so-called leaders who so willingly wage war on anyone they please have ever had to face such a horror themselves? Next, consider this Native American quote. Many will lose their strength, yet others will no longer be able to dream and have visions. Man will start waging war against his fellow man for no reason. He will prove incapable of telling the truth and treating his brother with honesty. He will no longer be able to survive on his land. His life will be filled with resentment and sadness. Gradually, in the end, man will poison himself and everything he touches. All of this has been foretold. Again, from a Native American. About the Thanksgiving holiday and its meaning, conclusions are very conflicting for good reason. From AI Overview, this definition, for many Native Americans, Thanksgiving is considered a day of mourning rather than celebration, as it marks the arrival of European settlers and the subsequent centuries of oppression, land loss, and genocide that followed, leading them to view the holiday as a reminder of a painful historical trauma. My distant ancestors were Choctaw, a Choctaw chief. The Trail of Tears is the remembrance of the same path that has now led us all to this dark hour. Unquantifiable are the others who have suffered the consequences of empire over the course of centuries. Loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute until nothing is left, with global climate engineering operations being at the top of the list of completely insane human activities. Yes, I'm criticizing this empire in which I live. That is not in any way to advocate any other country or government. It is simply to state a fact. So now what? Is giving up an option? Short answer, no, it isn't. Standing steadfastly against the fading of the light is our absolute obligation. There is nothing to think about. There's nothing to ponder. There must be a striving with all our strength toward unyielding resolve. We're here for a reason. There's a point. There's a purpose. And all that's asked of us is to do our part, to make a difference for the better, to the best of our ability and given our individual circumstances, until our last breath, until we are relieved of our post. by our Maker. This is where unshakable solace resides, and no matter what comes, this is a life well lived. This is a story that ends well. All this being said, we must never ever forget that life, that creation is miraculous beyond any comprehension. Consider this example. Scientists revive 32,000-year-old plant from Siberian permafrost. A 32,000-year-old seed with a spark of life that refused to die. That's creation. That's the miracle that I never, ever lose sight of, no matter how dark the horizon is. We can't yet know what allies we may yet have. We must press on. That is our duty. Please make your voice heard in this all-important battle to sound the alarm for everything that matters. If, by our collective efforts, we could alter our current course, even slightly, starting by stopping climate engineering operations, we would at least buy time to focus on other challenges we face. And that's worth fighting for till our last breath. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Every single day counts. Face to the wind, never surrender. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org.